This is Ben Television News Roundup, a compilation of major stories in the week ending. I'm Tunde Alabi. Thank you for being part of the program today. The Prime Minister has said that the Conservative government is responsible for publishing proposals on corporate governance and give powers to shareholders to veto pay policies. She made this known Wednesday following the statement by the Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn that more than 800,000 people in England are on zero-hour contract and that the Prime Minister has abandoned a campaign manifesto on corporate greed.
Mr. Speaker, every member across this House should be concerned that inflation is once again running ahead of people's pay. This week, workers at McDonald's restaurants took strike action for the first time in this country. The boss of McDonald's, Steve Easterbrook, is reported to have earned £11.8 million last year, while some of his staff are paid as little as £4.75 per hour. Does the Prime Minister back the McDonald's workers' case for an end to zero-hours contracts and decent pay?
Prime Minister.
Obviously, the issue that has taken place in McDonald's is a matter for McDonald's to deal with, but the questions... Let's focus on what the Right Honourable Gentleman has raised, which is, let's focus on what the Right Honourable Gentleman has raised about things like zero-hours contracts. In fact, the number of people on zero-hours contracts is very small. There are people who genuinely say as a proportion of the workforce, who genuinely say that it is a benefit to them to be on those contracts. But for 13 years, the Labour Party was in government and did nothing about zero-hours contracts. It is this Conservative government that has put the workers first and banned exclusive zero-hours contracts.
Mr. Speaker, my question was about McDonald's, and the Chief Executive is paid 1,300 times as much as his staff. There are 800,000 people, approximately, in Britain on zero-hours contracts. When she became leader, the Prime Minister pledged, and I quote, "I want to make shareholder votes on corporate pay not just advisory, but binding." And she put it into her manifesto. That manifesto has now been dumped or archived, or whatever way you want to describe it. And like so much else in her manifesto, where was the tough talk on corporate greed? Was it just for the election campaign, or is it going to be put, or is it going to be put into law?
Prime Minister.
Well, I suggest to the Right Honourable Gentleman that he looks again at the action that in government Conservatives have taken on this issue. It is the Conservative government that has recently published our proposals on corporate governance. It's Conservatives that gave shareholders the power to veto pay policies. It's Conservatives that forced companies to disclose board directors' pay. And it's Conservatives that introduced tough transparency measures for the banks. That's been done not by a Labour government. It's the Conservative Party that's been putting workers first.
I note she uses the word advisory because page 18 of the dumped manifesto says, Mr. Speaker, the next Conservative government will legislate to make executive pay packages subject to strict annual votes by shareholders. She's gone back on her word. To help people struggling, Mr. Speaker, to help people struggling to make ends meet, many politicians have become convinced that we need to cap energy prices. Even the Prime Minister was briefly converted to this policy. Last week, the profit margins of the big six energy companies hit their highest ever level. I wonder if I could now prevail on the Prime Minister to stick to her own manifesto pledges on this matter as well.
Prime Minister.
Well, first of all, on the question of what we were doing on corporate governance, actually I didn't use the word advisory in my answer, so can I suggest to the Right Honourable Gentleman that in future he listens to the answer and doesn't just read out the statement that he's been... But he has raised an important issue. He's raised an important issue about energy prices, because we are concerned about the way that that particular market is operating. We do expect the companies to treat customers fairly, and That's why we have been looking at the action that can be taken, and it's why the Business Secretary has been doing exactly that. And he wrote to Ofgem in June asking them to advise on what action they could take to safeguard customers. We're particularly concerned about those who are the poorest customers, who are kept on these tariffs that do not give them value for money. So I agree, and it's the government that is doing something about it.
Well, Mr. Speaker, if only that were the case, because Ofgem's plans only will benefit 2.6 million customers. 17 million customers are shortchanged by the big six energy companies. She could and should take action on it. Mr. Speaker, but she's not the only one going back on her word. When the members opposite have, Mr. Speaker, when the members opposite have calmed down a little, I'd just like to say this: at last year's Sports Direct annual meeting, Mike Ashley personally pledged to ban the use of zero-hours contracts in his company. A year on, they're still exploiting insecure workers with zero-hours contracts. Will the Prime Minister join me in now demanding that Mr. Ashley honour his words and end zero-hours contracts in all of his companies?
Prime Minister.
I've said it's this government that has actually taken action in relation to zero-hour contracts, unlike the Labour Party. But the right honourable gentleman talks about manifestos and people going back on their word. I might remind him that in the Labour Party manifesto there was a commitment to support Trident, our independent nuclear deterrent. Shortly after the election, in private, he told people he didn't agree with that. For years, the right honourable gentleman sat on the Labour Party benches and didn't support Labour policy. Now he's Labour leader and he still doesn't support Labour policy.
Mr. Speaker, I listened really carefully to what the Prime Minister said on this occasion, and I'm struggling to see the connection between what she just said, Mike Ashley, Sports Direct and McDonald's. So maybe she could now answer the question, will she condemn what Sports Direct and McDonald's are doing to their staff? It's quite straightforward, yes or no. Mr. Speaker, today, thousands of nursing and other healthcare staff are outside Parliament. They're demanding that this government scrap the 1% pay cap. Poor pay means experienced staff are leaving and fewer people are training to become nurses. There's already a shortage of 40,000 nurses across the UK. Will the Prime Minister please see sense and end the public sector pay cap and ensure our NHS staff are properly paid?
Minister.
We absolutely value the work of all those who work in the public sector, nurses, teachers and others, who are doing a good job for us day in and day out in often what are very difficult and harrowing circumstances. It might be helpful if I remind the House as to where we are on the issue of the pay review bodies and public sector pay, because there are two pay review body reports for 2017-18 still to be published and for the government to respond to for police and prison officers, and that will happen shortly. And then later, as always happens every year, later in the autumn, we will publish the framework for 2018-19, and we'll continue to balance the need to protect jobs, the need to protect public sector workers, and the need to ensure that we're also protecting and being fair to those who are paying for it, including public sector workers. But I say to the right honourable gentleman that what we have seen from what he does in this House and outside this House is consistently stand up and ask for more money to be spent on this, that and the other. Now, he can do that in opposition. He asks consistently for more money to be spent. He can do that in opposition because he knows he doesn't have to pay for it. The problem with Labour is that they do it in government as well. And when Labour, as a result of the decisions the Labour Party took in government, as a result as a result of the decisions the Labour Party took in government, we now have to pay more on debt interest than on NHS pay. That's the result of Labour.
U.S. President Donald Trump has promised to reduce the burden of tax payment for U.S. businesses. He said that businesses in the U.S. pay the highest tax on any business in the world. While speaking at the White House on his tax reform bill, Mr. Trump said that he plans to make tax payments simple and easy to understand.
Since the day I took office, we've added 1.2 million private sector jobs, and a lot more than that if you go from the time we actually got elected November 8th, including 125,000 manufacturing jobs, and we just had another very good month for manufacturing and the jobs. You probably all saw that. But if we're going to keep this momentum going and allow the economy to truly take off as it should, it is vital that we reduce the crushing tax burden on our companies and on our workers. We pay the highest tax of any country in the world on businesses, and we can't keep doing that. Last week, I repeated my principles for tax reform. First, we must make the tax code as simple as possible. It's extremely complex, it's not fair, and it's extremely hard to understand. So we want to make it as simple as possible. Second, we must provide tax relief for middle-class workers and families. Third, we must restore a competitive edge, which we've lost. We're doing fine, but we lost the competitive edge. You see what's going on all over the world. So we can have real job growth throughout America. We can't be the jobs magnet of the world if we continue to tax our industries at rates 60% higher than companies in other countries. Can't do it. And finally, we must bring back trillions of dollars that are currently parked overseas. We have, in my opinion, $4 trillion. $4 trillion, massive amounts of money that can't come back to our country because of our tax code and because of the rates. And this is more than just tax reform, this is tax cutting, to put it in a very simple term. We're going to cut taxes. We're going to reduce taxes for people, for individuals, for middle-income families. We're going to reduce taxes for companies, and those companies are going to produce jobs. Tax reform that follows these principles will create millions of new jobs and ensure that more products are stamped with the very beautiful letters and words, "Made in the USA." It's time to lower our taxes, bring back our wealth, and make America the jobs magnet that it can become, and pretty quickly. It's really, in other words, an expression I don't know if too many of you have heard it. It's time to make America great again. Has anybody heard that expression? I don't think so. So that's what we're doing. We're making America great again. You see it in the numbers. You see it with jobs. You see it with companies moving back in. They're moving back in at very, very big numbers. They're coming back into our country, and you haven't seen that for a long time, so we're very proud of that. So we're now going to discuss tax reform and tax cuts, and I appreciate you being here. Thank you, everybody, very much.
U.S. Attorney General Jeff Sessions has announced the end of deferred action for childhood arrival, DACA, and an immigration program that gives protection to people who arrive the U.S. as children. U.S. President Donald Trump has threatened to end the program despite appeals from business leaders and politicians.
It's okay. Take your time.
I'm not sure how I will go home later today and explain to my mom that the help I have been providing her is not there any longer.
20-year-old Flor Reyes helped her single mother raise her 5 younger siblings, all born here, so they are U.S. citizens. But suddenly she finds her future is uncertain.
We have come out of the shadows, only to become even in more danger.
Her reason is one that affects nearly 800,000 others. Like Reyes, all were born in another country, but grew up in the United States. In many cases, they know no other place as home. Until Tuesday, when the government announced the closure of the program known as DACA, they could count on renewable work permits and protection from deportation.
There's something in the air that you can, or at least I can almost physically taste. That's such this heightened tension.
tension turned mass civil disobedience in front of New York's Trump Tower, a response to the administration's decision to end DACA for legal or possibly legalistic reasons. The Constitution assigns the role of lawmaker to Congress. The executive is tasked with enforcing that law.
President Trump could not give these folks a permanent solution. No president can. It's beyond any president's constitutional authority. Obama knew that. President Trump knew that. So Congress has to fix this.
It's a point that doesn't sit well with activists and leading proponents of the program, from the White House to Trump's hometown, who argue the decision is an act of hypocrisy.
The legal analysis about DACA's legality has not changed at all. It is the exact same legal analysis that existed at the very start of the Trump administration. When President Trump himself said that the Dreamers could rest easy, nothing has changed in terms of the legal analysis. The only thing that has changed is the politics.
And with the program scheduled to end completely in March, unless a divided Congress enacts legislation before then, nothing feels certain.
I don't have any hope in this government or even in this country, if I'm going to be honest. My hope is really with these people that you see here with us today. This is where the movement's going to really get its power, and this is the people who are going to lead the next generation of warriors.
We are the voice within your heart, times 11 million. So listen, come on.
Meanwhile, the U.S. congressional leaders have signaled their intention to pass legislation that will permanently address the legal status of nearly 800,000 undocumented immigrants who were brought to the United States as children. President Donald Trump's administration ended DACA Tuesday. DACA was an executive order signed by former President Obama protecting undocumented young adults who are known as Dreamers.
Once protected by the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program, Akiko now feels exposed. She arrived in America from the Philippines at age 10 and studied to be a nurse.
Deportation's always a fear, but there's also the fear of not being able to pay for your rent or pay for your food.
The Trump administration says ending DACA allows Congress to replace a legally suspect executive order with something far more durable, a federal law.
I have a love for these people, and hopefully now Congress will be able to help them and do it properly.
Reaction came swiftly on Capitol Hill.
The clock is ticking. We are now in a countdown toward deportation for 780,000 protected by DACA today. We need to pass in this month of September a DREAM Act, a permanent law in this country that says that these young people will have their chance to become part of America's future.
70% of Americans at least want to give these kids a second chance and a good life in our country. You should want them to stay. They're great kids. They're working. They're productive.
Durbin and Graham are backing the DREAM Act, which would allow DACA beneficiaries who meet work or educational requirements to remain in the United States and eventually apply for citizenship. Democrats are demanding prompt votes.
We're ready to pass it. I am confident that if put on the floor, it will garner overwhelming support from both sides of the aisle.
But powerful Republicans say they will only consider the DREAM Act if U.S. border security is strengthened.
And the larger problem is that we do not have control of our borders. We want to make sure that we fix this issue for these kids, for these young people, and address the root cause of the problem so we don't have the same thing 10 years from now.
Some Democrats say they are open to tougher enforcement short of the U.S.-Mexico border wall favored by the president. But they fear negotiations will drag on and delay congressional action, putting people like Akiko at risk.
We should all be able to dream together and to work hard to where we want to go.
President Trump tweeted that if Congress fails to act, he, in his words, will revisit the issue.
And with that, we conclude the news roundup for this week. Thank you for being part of the program. I am Tunde Alabi. Enjoy the rest of your week. Bye. As part of our continued efforts to reach the African and other ethnic communities in the United Kingdom with greater impacts and create the platform to hear your silent and unheard views in this hugely growing community in the United Kingdom, our channel, Ben TV, presents to you another live current affairs television program. Our focus on the program is to review and discuss issues around the diaspora community in the UK. The program offers you the unrestricted voice on issues affecting you in the UK. Join us live every Monday at 10 a.m. to 12 noon. Another business segment of Dialogue in Diaspora, 2 to 3 p.m. every Monday. But guess what? You can be part of the program. Just send us an email at bentelevisionuk@gmail.com. Dialogue in Diaspora, your voice, your opinion on our TV.